Who is unkind. All right. So we are recording now. So let me just backtrack just a little bit. We are talking about red flags of life. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Relationships are the currency of life. And it's not about money, it's not about career. It is about relationships. Relationships. They will make you, they will break you, they will shift you, and they will shape you. I like that saying. It rhymes, it's catchy. And I want people to remember this because where would we be without relationships? What career would you choose if there was no one in the world to serve, no one to relate to? You wouldn't. Life is pointless without relationships. So as we think about relationships, let's think about the qualities that we possess and that people possess as we move into relationships with them. So first red flag we're talking about is meanness. Someone who is unkind, overly critical, and judgmental. That is mean. Okay? That is mean. We're not going to make any excuses for meanness. No excuses at all. We're going to call it what it is. Okay? I met with a man the other day, actually a couple years ago. He was well into his 60s. And even then, at this point in his life, the impact that his mother's treatment of him had on him, it was horrendous. He was thinking about ending his life because he was still in a relationship with his mother. She was that mean. Unkind, overly critical, and judgmental. Can you see how being in a relationship with someone, whether it's an intimate relationship or familial relationship with someone who is mean, can impact somebody? Now, people might say, well, that's not enough to cause someone to end their lives. Well, if you think about it, what is the impact on one's emotions, their thoughts, their quality of life if they live with someone who is always mean? And if this is you, if this is where you're at in terms of living with somebody who's mean, I want you to know that it is not your fault that that person is mean. It is not your fault. We do not treat people in accordance with who those people are. We treat people in accordance with who we are and who we know ourselves to be. I have two daughters. I love them very much. If I am mean to them, it's not because of what they did. It's because of how I'm being. And back to our conversation earlier about awareness and choice. It's important for us to be aware of how we treat other people so we can choose to be different. And if we're having trouble choosing to be different, guess what? We don't fully understand what moves us to do what we do. In order to change, the road to healing and change is paved with understanding. We want to understand what causes us to be mean. It's not a life sentence. You don't have to be mean for the rest of your life. But if somebody is mean, be aware. It's going to take a toll on your mental health. Okay? If somebody is unkind, overly critical, and judgmental. Now, you might have some thoughts about this, and I'm very curious. What do you think contributes to people being mean? Just throw some things in the chat. What do you think contributes to people being? Some examples. You know what? What's wrong with you? Why would you do that? What's wrong with you? Is that even a real question? Why would you do that? What's wrong? Do you see the facial expression? That wasn't a question. It was a statement. The statement was something is wrong with you. You're an idiot. There's absolutely no reason to treat people like that. Okay. Now, what happens and how this impacts our mental health over time is we internalize those messages, especially when they start with us as children. Children, they think everything happens as a result of them. They're at the center of the world. They're taking all this information from the outside, and their interpretation is, oh, this person who's bigger, older, they must be right. They must know something that I don't know. So something is wrong with me. And over time, right? Repetition leads to association, and association leads to identification. We start to believe these things are true. This is how we learn our names, for example. Someone calls you as a child, you're hearing all these sounds, but because you're hearing the sound over and over and over and over and over again, you start to make an association. Oh, okay, so that association, okay, that's me. We hear repetition, association, but then over time, we start to say, oh, Andrew. Oh, Andrew means me. Oh, I am Andrew. All of this communication, now I internalize that. I take that on as my identity. So if somebody mean, you're going to be internalizing all of that meanness. Over time, it will take a toll. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next red flag. Someone's negative, very similar to being mean, but negative is really somebody who's hyper focused on the bad things. They might not necessarily be criticizing you, but they're pessimistic about life, about everything in life, or almost everything. That's not going to work. Don't try that. I've tried that before. It didn't work, right? Things like that, this negativity. When we say negative things, when we focus on negative things, we actually end up feeling more anxious. We've talked a little bit about anxiety, but for those who are new, and just a little bit of a refresher, anxiety essentially is a picture of the future that's negative. When we picture a negative future about our lives, we feel anxious. And if somebody is in your life and they're painting negative pictures all the time, they're probably anxious, and it's going to cause you to feel anxious. And over time, you start to believe that, and then you feel powerless. So anxiety then rolls over into depression. So here's some interesting things, or a little phrase that I think is important to think about mental health, our own mental health. Mental health is not just nature or nurture. It is both. It's nature and nurture. So it's important that we be aware of our nature, but that we also nurture our nature. So if you're already kind of prone to anxiety, which I would say that I am, being in a relationship with somebody who's negative and who sees the negative and focuses on the negative and points out the negative, it's only going to reinforce my own anxiety and make things more challenging for me. So we want to be aware of that. Does it mean that they're a bad person? No. Does it mean that they have bad intentions? No. Especially parents. Parents have the best of intentions, right? We want to parent our children. We want to help them avoid certain situations. We want to help them learn and not make the mistakes that we do or did. So what do we naturally tend to do? We tell them what not to do, or else this is going to happen. Pro parenting tip, okay? Telling someone what not to do is nowhere close as important and impactful as telling someone what to do. They are very different things. As I support people to move through this process of change, a lot of people know what they're doing in their lives. It's just wrong. They're not happy with it, but they don't know what to do instead. I was working with a couple, and they tend to fight. And now we're working on healing from that, and we're working on doing something different. And they were being really hard on themselves. And I didn't have to, but I enjoyed letting them know you're being a little bit harsh on yourself. And I asked them, how many couples have you actually seen disagree well? Did you grow up in an environment where you saw people have disagreements and resolve them well? And they looked at each other like, no, never saw that. So how would you expect yourself to do something that you've never seen done before? It's an unfair expectation that we have of ourselves and often of other people. So parents, if you are parenting in a way that you were parented, it's really important to evaluate that. Just because you have good intentions don't mean you will have a good impact. Okay. We want to focus on impact, not just intentions. So if you are a negatively focused person, let's connect. Let's change that. Let's learn how to see the good, see the positive, because it will have an impact on our mental health and the mental health of the people that we love the most. Let's move on to red flag number 3. Aggression. Aggression. Someone who is forceful, physically and or verbally. Okay, let's talk a little bit about aggression. What is aggression? Aggression is a style of communication. We can look at it that way. Okay. Now, I like continuums. You know me. I like continuums. So on a communication continuum, let's say we have passive on this side, aggressive on this side. Passive, that's when you don't say much. You don't share your opinion. You allow people to, take things on, take over, basically you're a doormat. Okay, that's the extreme version. Aggression is where you take nothing from nobody. If something happens, you get upset, you're unleashing, right? 2 extremes. The middle is assertiveness. Assertiveness is it's synonymous with healthy communication. When we are assertive, we're not being passive. We're not, being silent when it's time to speak up. And we're not being aggressive. We're not yelling at people when we could have a calm, rational conversation. Now, it doesn't mean that yelling is bad or wrong. Okay. Because it's important to understand this. As much as I am an advocate for living assertively, I have a course called Living Life the Assertive Way. Moving on the spectrum is important to be able to do, to be able to choose. There's that word again. To choose to be able to move on this spectrum. Being stuck on one end, not good, not healthy, not healthy. But being able to be aggressive and forceful, physically or verbally, is important. Let me give you an example. If someone comes up to me and says, Andrew, give me your wallet, and they pull out a gun or a knife or something, I'll be like, sure, take it. I probably wouldn't even say anything. I'll just take it out, toss it, be on my merry way. A passive response, I think, in that situation is probably going to be useful. If somebody says, Andrew, give me your child, you better believe you're not going to see a moment of passivity in that, in me, in that moment, right? You will see some serious kind of aggression. So it's not about right or wrong necessarily. It's about the ability to access and choose where you want to be on that spectrum. I didn't mention passive aggressive, which is like a combination of passive and aggressive. Like you will send indirect messages. You'll be very sarcastic. And, you'll have thoughts about somebody. You won't tell them directly to their face to help them, but you'll tell everybody else behind their back, right? To tear them down. We don't want those kinds of things. So be aware of these kinds of things. How does this impact our mental health? Well, I think it's pretty obvious, right? But just in case it's not, if you grow up with somebody or in relationship with somebody who's always yelling, physiologically, it takes a toll. My dad, he yelled a lot as a child when I was a child. And it's partially not his fault because genetically, like he has these cords of steel, like it's like he swallowed a megaphone. My dad's voice is loud. He's just a loud man. But when stress and anxiety, frustration, and all that stuff gets in the mix, it used to roll into aggression. And that just compounded my own anxiety. It's like a lion in the jungle. I remember being startled as a child. So if you're in a relationship with someone who's aggressive, who's loud, who's, not to mention physically, verbally abusive, and it's going to take a toll. So we want to be aware of that. And if you see it in this person that you're considering, dating, marriage, all that stuff, but it's not applied to you, it's applied to friends, it's applied to objects, it's applied to strangers, please know it's just a matter of time. It is just a matter of time before it becomes directed towards you. Okay? Be aware. Okay? Be intentional. Okay? Remember, nobody's perfect. I'm not saying that. But what we want to look at is awareness. Is the person aware? Do they have the ability to be intentional? Do they have the ability to turn it down a notch? Or are they just stuck on like maximum volume with the aggression? Be aware. Okay? Be aware. We're going to move on. Controlling. This goes nicely. When I say nicely, I mean it fits. It's congruent with aggression. It seems a little bit different. Aggression can be used to control people, but manipulation can also be used to control people. It can be strategic, it can be smooth, it can be financial, it can be spiritual. All these elements of control, slightly telling people what they think is best to do virtually all of the time. I work with women a whole lot around things like this. And unfortunately, it comes after a really intense breakup that usually lasts years, where there's some undoing now because the control started in terms of endearment. It looked like love. It looked like care, right? It looked like jealousy, right? Someone is proud of you. They don't want you to, be seen a particular way or spoken to a particular way by other people. And then they don't want you talking with other people. They don't want you spending time with other people. Controlling. Controlling. Someone who doesn't allow others to make their own choices. Be aware. How does this impact our mental health? Well, can you imagine what it would be like if every time you wanted to make a decision, someone pointed out the negative possibilities? Oh, you don't want to do that. You hear that phrase? You don't want to do that. What do you mean you don't want to do that? I just told you I want to do that. No, you don't want to do that. How do you know what I want? It's in the language. You don't. Someone is presupposing that they know what you think and they know what you want. Not healthy. Well, then how do you highlight something that you think is a bad idea? Well, here's another tip. Because the reality, there are pros and cons to every idea. But we don't want to simply highlight the cons, whether it's our perspective or somebody else's perspective. In a relationship, when you're making joint decisions, it's not healthy when it's always one person's way. And it's not healthy when all you're doing is pointing out the downside to someone's perspective. We want to highlight the positives and the negatives to our perspective as well as the perspective of others. If people can't handle hearing the pros and cons to their position, or if they aren't able to share the pros and cons to your position, red flag. Be aware. Be very aware. Okay. We as human beings want to experience, and I would dare say need to experience, a degree of authority and control in our own lives. You see it in little children. They naturally want to do their own thing. And we never want to break a child's spirit. and cause them to believe that it's not safe to make choices. There's a difference between punishment and teaching. Sometimes we use the word discipline and we're punishing, but discipline, discipling, it's about teaching. It's about walking with somebody. It's about carrying somebody. It's about bringing the best out of somebody. It's not about manipulating and forcing them to do what you want them to do. Whether you're a parent, whether you're a partner, be aware of controlling behaviors, controlling mindsets and attitudes. And once again, if you see it being exercised in the life of someone else, their children, their parents, it's a matter of time. Just a matter of time. Okay. And we'll circle back to what we can do differently if you find yourself being controlling, because there's another side to, well, you know what, since we're here, let's talk about it a little bit. What contributes to being controlling? Quite often, at the heart of control lives anxiety. Sometimes we feel unsafe when we are not making the decisions. Anxiety, unaddressed anxiety, leads to either the desire to control things or the belief that you are in control of nothing. It's either the two extremes. Okay? So it's important to be aware of that. If you are controlling, it's good to be aware of what's causing this for me. It's probably a learned behavior. I probably witnessed this, but then I also probably internalize this, and I get to address that. We are not responsible for how other people treat us. We are responsible to address how other people treat us. Similarly, we are not supposed to control other people. We can influence other people. We can impact other people, but that's very different than controlling. I'll move on. Closed. Sorry, we're closed. Closed for business, closed to ideas, closed to opinions, closed to letting you in, right? Someone who doesn't share about themselves is closed. Now, there's a difference between being private and being closed. We talk a little bit about intentionality, being intentional. So privacy is very different than secrecy as well. Sometimes people do not share things with us because it's private. It's not our business. Maybe we haven't established that level of trust yet, but that's an intentional decision. Whereas being closed, it's default. They don't share anything about their lives. As far as you know, they have no challenges, no stressors, no nothing. There's no such thing as a perfect person. Everyone I know has experienced some degree of hurt, some degree of trauma. If they're not aware of that, it's going to come out sooner or later. Being closed sometimes is an indication of a lack of healing or a lack of awareness. If someone is not able to share their lives with you, please do not share your life with them. When I say share your life, I mean do not get deeply involved in, sharing everything about you, and not a good idea. Okay? You heard it here. Not a good idea. Some of us, we love to help people and we believe that we can save people. I do believe in modeling. But before you model and you give the best that you have away to someone, what you want to understand is, are they aware that they are closed, and are they interested in being open? It's important for people to take the lead and take responsibility in their own lives. If they are closed, move on. Okay? Move on. You can let them know. You know what? It's important for me to be in a relationship with someone who is actually able to share, to be transparent, because that's what I want. That's important to me. If you're not able to do that, that's okay. But we're not going any further. Please make intentional choices. Make intentional choices. We have choice, okay? This is a big one here. Red flag number 6. substance use or substance dependence, depending on a substance. Someone who copes with substance is not going to be growing very well. Mentally, it can even impair our physical growth, right? Substance use as a coping strategy is not the same as dealing with challenges that life will present. Now, especially in the Black community, marijuana in various parts of the world, it is just it's part of the background. It's part of the backdrop, right? You have it in your tea, right? There are medicinal properties. Okay? I'm not faulting that. I'm not talking about that. I knew a young man, and he wasn't Black, but he used marijuana a great deal. And to the comments earlier that I have all the answers, here's an example of the reality that I don't know everything. I had my assumptions about marijuana use, and it wasn't until I started to get to know the young man and start to understand what were the contributing factors to his use. He had these migraines ever since he was a child. And these migraines, they were unbearable. And nothing, no medication would help him feel any better. The only thing that helped reduce the pain for him was using marijuana. So he wasn't using marijuana to deal with unpleasant emotions. He was using marijuana so he could actually go to school, so he could actually move his life forward. It was not maladaptive. It was not unhelpful. It was actually helping him. And it changed my perspective. It made room for the medicinal side of it. However, coping with unpleasant and intense emotions by numbing them, that's not growing. That kind of coping does not lead to change. If we avoid our situations and we avoid the challenges, we never realize that we're capable to deal with them, regardless of the substance. And substance isn't just, marijuana or alcohol or other narcotics. Sex can be substance use. You can even throw any kind of dependence in there. Alcoholism, not alcohol, workaholism, right? Anything that we do to avoid dealing with uncomfortable emotions is coping. And we want to be aware of that. When we see that in other people's lives, again, a lot of people are on a journey. So we don't necessarily want to write people off. What we do want to understand is, are they content with coping? Do they have a plan? Do they know of resources to move beyond coping and to enter into change? That's important. That's really, really important. So be aware of that. All right. So now we're going to talk about the healthy alternatives, and then we'll open up for some questions. So as opposed to being mean, be kind. Look for kindness in people. Invite people to be kind. If they did something was mean, you can ask them, could you be a little bit kinder? I want to know if it's actually possible. The way you said that was actually kind of mean. I'm open to learning about, how I could do things different. So I hope you are too. Can you find another way to say that? And if they can't, they're holding that red flag real proud so you can see it. Focusing on the good or the positive, that is important. It will impair or improve our mental health. So encouraging people, yourself included, to focus on the good. Now, when I say focus on the good, I don't mean live in denial and ignore the not so good. Right? We want to pay attention to what's not so good in the spirit of growth. But how do we do that? We want to highlight pathways to growth. We want to acknowledge what's already good, but we want to invite people to be aware and to be intentional about that focus. We talked a little bit about cultivating awareness. How do we do that? Well, you can take the course. That's one way, knowing what assertiveness is, being aware that you can modulate on that spectrum. But it does take practice. It takes practice asserting yourself to acknowledge, you know what, I do have an opinion about this. You know, it might not be right. You might not like it, but this is my opinion. Getting comfortable sharing that. And if people aren't able to tolerate that, that is a sign of trouble ahead. Okay. Number 4, allow others to make their choices. That's important. That is, I don't think it can get any more clear than that. Let's talk about cultivating healthy openness, right? It might take a little bit of steps to build trust, but we want to cultivate openness and be committed to growth for yourself, for others, and for the relationship. And I'm excited to hear what you all think. What are your questions? I'm going to stop sharing here, and you're welcome to use the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand, and I will make my way around. One of the most common questions I get as I'm working with people is there any hope for me? Is there any hope for this relationship? Yes, there is always hope. There is always hope. We can impact change in our lives and in our relationships. And one of the things that I talk about in The Art of a Genuine Apology, my book, which is actually going to be available on Audible really, really soon. That is a wonderfully shameless plug. It talks about readiness. There are signs of readiness for what you want. Okay. When people become aware that, you know what, there's a problem here, and they're ready to take initiative, they're ready to take responsibility, those are good signs for change. Those are really, really good signs for change. So yes, there is hope, I believe, for pretty much everyone. But there are signs for readiness to activate the good stuff that's within them. So we talked about red flags. Are there any questions? Questions or comments? I'm just imagining people are silent because they're engaging in this conversation, and the person next to them, they got a whole bunch of red flags attached to them. Well, what do we do? Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. I'm glad you're finding it good. It's good. Okay, so come up with hypothetical situations if that will work. Maybe let's talk about somebody else's life, who you've seen red flags. You have questions about somebody else's life, because it might be a little bit easier to draw lessons that way. And if there aren't any questions, that's okay. We can wrap up for the evening. Saida, you still there, Pastor Francis? Either of you have any thoughts?
Um, yes, Dr. Blackwood, thank you so much. You see, we always appreciate your presentation. And sometimes people, from having conversation, discussing with people about your presentation and what exactly what it means to them. It means a lot to a lot of people. And sometimes a lot of people are not willing to but to share or to ask some questions because they think it's directly or they're exposing what is happening in their family. But that does not mean that they're not getting, that does not mean that it's not making a lot of impact. But as you already know, in our community, sometimes we keep our things very secret, but they have been very, very productive in their lives in different ways. Um, I have asked a lot of questions and I take them some questions. Sometimes I do ask, sometimes I do not. And, giving people that opportunity to ask questions by themselves. But, praying back, as I said with them, it means a lot to them. But sometimes they don't want to come out openly to share. Today is one of those great days that I do appreciate.
Oh, that's
And these
awesome.
are some of the things we go through in our lives, in our families, in different ways. Especially, there are a lot of crises going on in families. There are a lot
Hmm.
of things going on with the economic meltdown, with the crisis spiritually, physically, and otherwise. I think this is what we need. And we'll continue to listen to you. And we also, as people, continue to apply it every day in our program and services because it's important to us to hear other book and also extend it to other people that we support in different ways. Because it's not just meant for people to listen, also for us that work with people directly every day. So these are very, very important to us to use them and bring it close to people that need it. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. And I definitely appreciate that it can be hard to be open. We talked about someone who's closed, and even in community can be really challenging. And we're also, recording this, and this is going on YouTube. So I'm not blind to that. One of the things that we can do is you can put it privately in the chat so that only I can see it. And that might be a step closer to taking a chance with that vulnerability. And as I read the comment, I won't say who it's from, but you raise a good point, and I believe that everybody experiences challenges, and what we get to do when we do acknowledge our challenges, especially in community, it creates a sense of solidarity because you're not alone. Not only are you not alone in community, but you're probably not the only one experiencing the situation that you find yourself in. So that's one of the benefits of asking questions, not just so you get an answer, but so other people can know that it's okay to ask questions. And we do have a question here. What's some advice for an unhealthy relationship? Well, the first piece of advice is it's good to be very specific about what is unhealthy in the relationship. We don't want to have an all or nothing approach to say the whole relationship is unhealthy, because then we're going to throw out the baby with the bath water. So if there are some good things in the relationship, it's important to be aware of that. But the unpleasant things or the unhealthy things, we want to be very specific about those things. And if there are significant risks of harm to oneself, especially immediate harm, we want to be prepared to take action. So we want to be very clear about that, because one of the things that causes people to stay in unhealthy and even abusive relationships is the idea that they don't have a choice. They feel powerless. They feel unsafe to try something different. And our thoughts and our beliefs, they contribute to our choices. They contribute to our emotions, how we feel, and then we tend to live and make choices based on how we feel. But just because of what you feel is real doesn't mean that how you're thinking about it is true, is accurate, is right. So if I'm telling myself I have no choice and that life is never going to change, I might as well stay here till I die. Those are all thoughts that are going to contribute to me feeling depressed and powerless. I will feel those things. I'll feel them in my body. I will feel that they are true. But it's not until I Look at those thoughts. This is one of the reasons why I recommend journaling. Looking at those thoughts. Is that actually true? Considering what choices you actually do have, and you may feel that much more empowered to make some different choices. Okay. So yes, very, very true. A really important comment here. It's not easy to leave relationships that had red flags due to emotional attachment. Ooh, yes, 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 you are right. What is the best way to detach from the emotions, which can lead to leaving the relationship? So, very, very, oh, I love the way you worded that. It is so true. The people who hurt us the most are often the people we love the most, but it's not all or nothing. So, leaving the relationship, let's talk about that. Sometimes we fear leaving the relationship as if that's going to be the end of the relationship. Sometimes leaving the relationship happens for a time, giving enough space and enough distance so that you can be safe and you can make a statement. I have seen people separate for the purpose of coming back together. So that's important. So to be specific about this question, how do you detach from the emotions? Well, we're not necessarily going to be detaching from them. We're actually going to be defining them. And I talked a little bit about journaling. So there's a difference between an emotion and a thought. They travel together, but they are very different. So you might feel, let's give a good example. You might feel attached to someone. You might feel indebted. You might feel obligated. You might even feel guilty for considering leaving, let alone actually leaving. But there are thoughts and beliefs attached to all of these emotions. We want to be very clear what thoughts are attached to these emotions. What worries do we have? So, real love never dies. I really do believe that. Uh, but relationships do change. It's important for relationships to evolve. If you enter a relationship and you are at a level 5 in maturity, which is the case for many of us, and you're growing to a 6 and a 7 and an 8, and the other person is not, there's going to be some pulling apart here. So it's not necessarily that you have to leave the relationship as much as you are highlighting, I'm growing. This is what I'm learning. This is what I'm seeing in me. Do you realize? Do you see? Do you desire? If there are signs and explicit indications that someone is saying, I'm good. I'm not going to change. I have no intentions to change. It's important to allow yourself to grieve that and then discuss, okay, well, where do we go from here? Because I'm growing and you're choosing not to. So what's going to be the cost here, the ramifications? What's going to happen here? So defining what you feel, looking at those beliefs, having those realistic conversations. Sometimes it's important to grieve. Okay. We're not very familiar with grieving outside of, the context of death. Even then we get stuck in grief because we don't know there's a process. But it's important to grieve things in our lives, in our relationships. Sometimes we grieve our youth. Sometimes we can grieve our vision. Sometimes we can grieve relationships by accepting this is not what I thought it was. I'm not advocating for divorce. I'm not just saying just go out and end it. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes we grieve an era and then we make room for a new era. And it comes with discussion. It comes with renegotiating. Okay, well, how do I live? How will we relate? So that's how I would say you don't necessarily need to detach the emotions, but define them. Look at the thoughts and see where you get to grieve and where you want to grow. Okay. Really, really, really good question. Can you advise us on stress coping techniques? Most certainly. But first, let's define what stress is, because stress isn't just bad. Okay. If you go to the gym, you want to increase your fitness. That means putting your body under some degree of stress, whether that's lifting weights or, increasing your cardio, running a little longer, maybe a little faster, all these things. Now, it becomes problematic when we do it too much, or we expect ourselves to live under the weight of this stressor forever, indefinitely. That's not healthy stress. So you get to look at your life and say, okay, am I growing as a result of this stressor? Okay, then it's intentional, because then how you deal with that is very different than I'm under the stress and I've been doing it indefinitely and it's not helping me grow. We don't cope with that. We want to change that, right? Now, stress also feels like anxiety in the body. The heart rate is escalating. The hormones are being, the serotonin, dopamine, like all of these things are being released as we experience anxiety. But anxiety feels a whole lot like stress in the body. So awareness is key. Are we feeling stressed? Or are we feeling stressed because we're feeling anxious? Because dealing with them is very different. Remember, anxiety is a picture of the future that's negative. And if you have a picture of the future that's negative, and you carry that picture around with you in every area of your life, not only are you going to feel stressed, but you're going to be stuck living as if what you're imagining is true. So defining, is it stress? And is it healthy stress or unhealthy stress? Or is it anxiety? Because if it is, then we get to deal with that. Okay. And maybe we'll talk a little bit further about that in another one of our sessions. But it's a really, really good question. And we're out of time, so I won't go any further, but it's a really, really good question. Yeah, jogging, exercise, eating well, all those things that we know to do, those will help us rest. Really important with dealing with stress. All right. So thank you for your time. Thank you for showing up and for the questions and the comments. And as always, info@Coach Drew. That's my email. If you want to follow up with me, by all means, or you can also connect with Pastor Francis or Miss Saida to connect that way. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blackwood, for that wonderful workshop. I know a lot of us had some takeaways there. I know I learned a few things. If you guys are not in our email, just put your email down below so we can contact you guys on our next workshop. I know Dr. Blackwood has many more topics for us to learn from. So please do so in doing that. We will also have this recording on our YouTube, so stay tuned and refer your friends to it as well. Have a great evening, guys.
Thank you, Saida.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.